What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Vinyl Den, your channel for record collecting by record collectors. I'm Nick. Today I'm talking about 5 records I'd never sell. There's a bunch of links down below. You got links for the Vinyl Den Facebook group, for the merch page, for the Spotify and Apple Music playlist that I put together every week, and the Patreon page. So make sure you check all that out. Like always, if you enjoyed the episode, make sure you give me a thumbs up. Hit that subscribe button down below. Make sure you hit that notification bell so you're notified every time I release new episodes. So this is one of those threads that's been going on in the vinyl community over the last month or so. I think it was the vinyl narrative that started this. I think these threads can be kind of a fun way to talk about like more personal kind of stories around some of the records we own. I've seen a bunch of videos over the last couple of weeks about this, so I decided to do one myself. So really up until just within the last couple of years, I always said I was somebody that never planned on selling any of my records. And that everything I had in my record collection would be something that someone else would have to deal with one day once I'm long gone. But as my record collection has grown over the last few years, I decided, it's probably best to start selling off parts of it. And I haven't sold off a lot of records, maybe somewhere in the neighborhood of, probably 200 to 300 records over the last couple of years. So what I try to do at least once or twice a year is go through my record collection and pull out at least, 50 or 60 albums and really try to find stuff that I know I have not listened to within the last year and a half, and probably won't listen to again. At least listen to enough to justify having them on vinyl. And I take them to my record store. I'm not looking to make a fortune off them. I'm looking just to sell them, get something back out of them, and then turn around to reinvest that into my record collection. That's why when I saw the title of the thread that's been going around, 5 records you'll never sell, it really made sense to me because there are some of those core records that I do never plan on selling. So when I sat down to pick the albums for the video, I didn't try to focus on like really rare albums. I tried to look at albums that have more of a meaning to me because I think those are the albums that I think I would never sell. I mean, there are a couple that are more like rare-ish, but there's nothing in here that's like mind-blowingly rare. So when I started thinking about this video and going through my record collection, there was one album that came to mind right away for me, and that is my 1977 first press of Pink Floyd's Animals. So yes, this looks very different than Pink Floyd's Animals that everyone knows out there. So this is what Animals typically looks like. This is my original US pressing of it with Battersea Power Station on it. But there was 3 different French pressings that also came out. The first 2 French pressings have the pink cover. This is a second press from 1977, and then the third pressing has the standard album cover on it with just the pink vinyl. So this is the second press of it. And like I said, the only way you know this Pink Floyd's Animals is because of the label on it. It's just kind of neat. It's one of those like novelty kind of releases, and that's really the only reason I love this album. It's Dark Side of the Moon is definitely my favorite album from Pink Floyd, but Animals is a very, very close second for me. And this is one of those albums that as soon as I found out this existed, I spent, probably a good several months, it's probably maybe 4 or 5 months trying to track down a really high quality version of it. It's not like this is a super rare version of this album or, it doesn't sell for a lot of money online. It's just one of those things that's something you don't see a whole lot. And I think mainly that's why I would never sell it. I think the interesting thing about this release is I grew up hearing all about how, black albums were always going to be the best sounding version of an album, that colored albums were always sounded terrible, always stay away from them. But, this is a great example of an album where I have, it on pink vinyl and I have the exact same album on black. And between the two of them, they sound exactly the same. So it's just another example of, where, yes, you can have a colored album that sounds terrible. You can have a black album that sounds terrible also. It's not really the color that makes the quality of the album. It's the mastering. There's a lot of other variables that go into it. But still, at the end of the day, this is one of those albums that I just never sell. Another album I know I would never sell is one that I think my wife bought this for me back in, it's probably 2018, I think is when she bought this. And I like to harass her about it because she spent more on this album than I ever have for any individual album. But this is an original pressing of Slowly Going the Way of the Buffalo by MXPX. And she bought this from, I think it was Japan is where she bought this from. And this is before the album got reissued and the box set came out. So this album came out in 1998 and it just wasn't pressed on vinyl. There's very few copies of it that were pressed. So it was really hard to find, which is why whenever I came across a copy of it on Discogs or on eBay, I always said I'd like to have a copy of it, but I just wasn't going to spend the kind of money that people were asking for it. So I remember I had taken my kids to the mall one day. It was around my birthday. And she called me up and she said, hey, when you get home, I got a package here for you. I came home and this was sitting on the counter. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe she'd actually spent the money and paid for it, especially once I logged into her Discogs account and saw how much she paid for it. But it was kind of funny because I think it was not too long after she bought it that MXPX announced that they were going to reissue most of their catalog in a box set. So even though I do have multiple copies of this album, I think probably at least another 4 or 5 copies of this album from the box set and other reissues that they've done over the last few years. This is an album that still means a lot to me just because obviously my wife bought it for me and it's an original pressing of this album. And even, 25 plus years later, it's still one of my favorite punk albums of the later part of the 90s. And I mean, heck, if I got rid of this, how could I harass my wife about it? So it's definitely one I would not get rid of. And speaking of this album, I actually bought, when they released the box set of their catalog a year or so after I got that original pressing, I actually bought a test pressing of Slowly Going the Way of the Buffalo. So it kind of goes along with that album. I got this is a custom cover I had made for it. It was some alternate artwork. So I do have a test pressing from the box set of that album also. So speaking of albums that were given to me, the next album was actually given to me by a viewer of the channel here pretty early on in the channel. I think it was like 2020 or 2021 when this was sent to me. This is the Mondo version of The Nightmare Before Christmas. And I don't remember if the person that sent it to me, if someone had bought it for them and they just weren't a huge fan of it. Something happened and they decided they didn't want it anymore, so they sent it to me. But really the reasoning behind me not wanting to sell this is really kind of twofold. First off, I would never sell anything that's given to me by a viewer. But really the other reason behind why I would never sell this is, my oldest son, this is one of his favorite movies growing up. This is one of those movies I've seen literally hundreds of times. He would run through the house singing these songs all the time. It's one of those movies I've owned multiple copies of. I've had it on DVD back in the day. I've owned digital copies of it. I have it on Blu-ray. So going through and just listening to this album brings back so many memories of, my kids when they were little. So there's a lot of sentimental reasons why I would never sell this album. But also, Mondo does a great job with these releases. I've always loved the Mondo albums I have. I love the alternate artwork that they have on there, and they did a great job with the way these albums turned out. I don't remember the color names they have for these. They do have these in like these anti-static sleeves, but the pressings themselves look really cool on them also. And then they get the other disc is like this pinwheel design. So yeah, it was sent to me by a viewer, and also because of the ties with my kids. Obviously, I'd never sell that one either. And then the next album is pretty new. This one came out, I think it was very early part of this year when this one came out. This is the Interscope Vinyl Collective version of the Untitled album by Blink-182. There's really nothing all that special about it. It just happens to be one of my favorite albums. It's got some alternate artwork on here. It's kind of hard to see maybe on the camera because it's white on white. I'll see if I can you can kind of see the smiley face on there if I kind of shine the light on there a little bit. It does sound great. It's one of my favorite. I've got maybe at least probably 4 or 5 different pressings of this album. This is probably the best sounding version of this album that I own. And I would say out of any album released in the last 25 years, this is probably my most listened to album. So when Interscope announced that they were going to do an IVC version of it, I knew it was one I had to have. And I've actually sold other versions of this album since I bought this one, just because I know this is like the definitive version of this album for me. Interscope always does a great job with these IVC pressings. I guess my own thing is, some of them have been maybe a little more limited than they probably should have been. I think they did like 2,500 copies of this one, which they probably should have pressed more because it sold out almost immediately. But, I don't know. It like I said, it's one of my favorite albums. It's a great sounding pressing, so it's probably the main reason why I would never sell it. And then for my 5th album, it's a tie. So it's really, I got 2 albums for my 5th album. And these are kind of, I guess, more obscure kind of ska-punk albums from the 90s. They're definitely a little more limited. They're probably a lot harder to find than some of the other stuff that I've got on my list here. Originally, I was kind of going back and forth between the 2 of them, and I was like, finally, it's just a tie. I gotta have both of them on here. But the first one is Greased. So this is a EP put out by Less and Shake back in 1997. These are all ska-punk versions of songs from the musical Grease, which was one of my favorite movies growing up. I still love that movie today. I think this pressing was put out by No Idea. Yeah, it's put out by No Idea Records back in 97. And I don't think it's probably not all that hard to find on Discogs. There probably are copies floating around out there, but I think it's one of those albums that probably a lot of people probably don't know all that much about. But if you grew up, you know, in the 70s and 80s, and you grew up watching Grease, or you know about Grease, this is a really cool album to check out. And you might be surprised how much you enjoy the Less Than Jake versions of those songs. And then the album I've got tied with the Less Than Jake album came out a year later. So this came out in 1998. This is Songs from Suburbia by Spring Heel Jack. So this came out in 1998. It didn't get pressed on vinyl until 2010. And I want to say it was really limited. It was like limited, I think 500 copies. Super hard to find. I spent literally years trying to track down a copy of this. And finally one day I went on Discogs and I just started messaging people on Discogs until I finally found somebody that would sell me a copy. This is another ska-punk album from the later part of the 90s. One of my favorite albums of that genre from that period. It was actually funny. I remember going to Warped Tour in 1999 and Blink-182 was actually on the main stage at the same time that Spring Heel Jack was on one of the side stages. I remember talking to my friend that was at Warped Tour with. We were trying to decide who we were going to go see. We decided to stay there and watch Spring Heel Jack. I think it was one of my favorite performances of that day. But at one point, Spring Heel Jack was also maybe a little inebriated, but they started making fun of Blink-182 and they started kind of mocking Blink at the same time and kind of singing along with them at the same time. It was really funny. It was a great day. It's an album I don't think really ever got the recognition that it truly deserved. But as far as like obscure ska albums from the 90s, this is definitely up towards the top for me. Now, unfortunately, because of how obscure it is, it'll probably never get repressed again. Well, that's all I got for you today, guys. Thanks for checking the show out. Make sure you drop me a comment down below. Let me know what some of the albums are that you have in your collection that you know you would never sell. Plus, I want to give a big thanks to the Vinyl Narrative putting this thread together. These videos are always kind of fun to go through and watch whenever they go around. Because I don't know about anyone else out there, but I enjoy hearing more of the personal stories behind some of the albums that people pick. But let me know what you guys think. Like always, if you enjoyed the episode, make sure you give me a thumbs up. Hit that subscribe button down below. That's all I got. Until next time, keep on spinning. Peace.